Hello and welcome to the Family Support Pilot Webinar for Direct Services staff. This webinar is being recorded today. I will go through the presentation, and at the end of the webinar we will stop the recording and take questions. Okay, so let's go to who we have with us on the line today. So my name is Nicole Lohr, and I'm a pre-K specialist with the ECAP team at the Department of Early Learning. And I'm housed in the Spokane office. And we also have with us today Carrie. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Carrie Beamer. I'm also a pre-K specialist with the ECAP program, and I am housed in the Bellevue office.
Okay, also joining us today, staff on the line from Economic Mobility Pathways, or EMPATH. This is, of course, the organization that designed and leads the mobility mentoring approach. So today we have with us Andrea Carusona, and she's a well-being specialist. She's our panelist today and will be helping us lead this webinar. Okay. Great, so here is a first look at our agenda here. So we're going to go over some information about what motivational interviewing is. We'll talk about core values and beliefs, about 4 guiding principles of motivational interviewing. We'll also talk and define the acronym OARS and what that, how to use that when implementing motivational interviewing. And then after that, we will jump into connecting motivational interviewing and mobility mentoring, working directly with families. We'll also talk a little about goal setting and motivation, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end. And as we go along, if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the questions box, and we'll either hold them until we pause, or we can answer them as we go. So one other thing that I want to throw out there before we start the webinar is, or before we start the content, is that you may hear us refer to parents or families, and we just want to know that when we use that term parent, we also mean potentially a guardian, but that person that is acting in the role of a parent for the children who are enrolled in the program who you're working with using this approach. So, I think we're ready to get going now. So I am going to take a moment and hand over the mouse and the keyboard to Carrie.
Okay.
Just one moment, Carrie.
Okay.
All right, I think I am ready.
Okay. So we are going to do a little introduction into what motivational interviewing is. If I could make the slide go. Oh, you know,
we have a poll first. That's right.
We have a poll first. I think we're going to try and get a little more information about you guys out in the field, about what your knowledge base is on motivational interviewing. Yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
I've launched the poll now, so you should see the poll on your screen, and go ahead and enter your answer into there about how familiar are you with motivational interviewing. All right, so a majority of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and then I'm going to share it real quick. So here are the poll results. As you can see, there's a nice spread of people that are somewhat familiar with motivational interviewing, some not at all or a little, and then a few that are very familiar and are putting it into practice with families.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what motivational interviewing is. So really it's a method that works on facilitating and engaging intrinsic motivation within the parent or guardian in order to change behavior. The definition of motivation is the act or the process of giving someone a reason for doing something. And then we also talk a lot about ambivalence. And ambivalence is the coexistence of opposing attitudes or feelings towards a person, an object, or idea. So it is within that resolving the ambivalence in goal setting is at the core of motivational interviewing. And the thing to remember about motivational interviewing, it's very goal-oriented, it's client-centered communication style that elicits behavior change by helping parents to explore and resolve sort of the ambivalence they may have towards that. It's also important to remember that this is a very non-judgmental, gentle approach to goal setting that is directive and purposeful, but in a very non-confrontational way. It's very much a coaching model, and as family support specialists, you are acting as that family's coach and sort of guiding them through the bridge. As a coach, we don't jump to conclusions or we don't jump ahead of families. We're right alongside offering them support and guidance. So why do we use motivational interviewing? That's a really great question. If my go to the next slide. There, thank you. So why do we use this? Well, there's been a lot of research and a lot of work has been done over the years, and it's had a pretty high success rate that will increase, it decreases your frustration working with families. Motivational interview also gives families hope. Again, research and data have proven it's very effective and allows families to create more realistic expectations when you are creating those goals. In motivational interviewing is a particular way of helping families recognize and do something about their current or potential problems. It is viewed as being particularly useful for those who are reluctant to change or who have that ambivalence towards changing behaviors. The strategies that you use in motivational interviewing are more than just persuasion or coercion. They're not argumentative. It's really about getting the person to see the intrinsic motivation that they have and move on to that behavior change. It's also, again, really important to remember that this is a collaboration and with the families that we're working with. And motivational interview honors the parent's autonomy. And when I say autonomy, I mean sort of that freedom from external controls or influences or independence to make their own decisions. And the reason that we want families to still experience that autonomy is that when it's honored, it leads to less resistance. So when people feel like their freedom to choose an action is threatened, they are motivated to perform that threatened behavior to prove that they still have free will enacted. So, for example, if I am coming into a family's home and I'm just harping on them every day, you have to stop smoking, you have to stop smoking, you have to do this, it can sometimes cause the opposite effect, and they could actually feel like, oh, well, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want. So inadvertently, we can cause families to continue that behavior if they don't have the freedom to change within themselves. Okay, so we are going to look at this next slide, and we're going to talk about our assumptions and what are assumptions and how every day in our life we sort of make assumptions about situations and people that we see. So when you look at this picture I have up here, what assumptions are you making that are happening in this picture right now? It looks like we have a male figure, a child, and possibly a female figure there. So if you can just type in the question box or the chat box, what do you guys think you see? Or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you so that you can tell me, what do you think is happening in this picture?
Okay, so we have one, and it says the child appears impatiently waiting while the adults talk. We have another one coming in. It says two staff are talking possibly, and the boy is listening in.
Okay, great. Keep them coming, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next slide. And I'm asking, so what if you took a little broader perspective of that picture? So based on your experiences and everything that you are, what does this picture now include, or how does it change now that you got a little bit broader perspective?
We got a couple more comments. A couple of folks think that they're on a trip and that maybe they look like they're on vacation. So maybe they're vacationing somewhere. Family on a trip or an outing, and they're waiting for something.
Okay, so I am going to show you the whole picture. So if you see, you guys were close. They are on vacation, but they happen to be trapped in a roller coaster high above Disneyland. And the reason that we are showing that I use this as an example is perhaps if you had ever been trapped in a roller coaster, you would be like, oh, I recognize how slanted the ground is, and I can see that there's people to help them. But the way our experiences and all of our bias and how we see each other, it's a normal part of our lives and our work. It's just that we want to take a closer look at that belief system and our value system when we are using motivational interviewing. So this leads us to sort of these two concepts of core values and your beliefs. And before we dive too deep into what motivational techniques you can use, it's really important for us to take pause and really think about the differences between beliefs and values. So I'm going to start with beliefs. Beliefs are those assumptions that we hold true. When we use our beliefs to make a decision, we are assuming a causal relationship of the past, which has led to this belief that also will apply in the future. And in this rapidly changing world where complexity is increasing day by day, using information from the past to make decisions about the future may not be the best way to support us in meeting our needs. Beliefs arise from learned experiences resulting from cultural and environmental situations we have faced. So our beliefs are really our assumptions we make about the world based on our past experiences, where values are not just based on information from our past, and they are sort of universal. Values transcend context because they are based on what is important to us, and they arise from the experience of being a human being, right? Values are intimately related to our needs, whatever we need, whatever is important to us, or what's missing in our lives is what we value. And as our life changes and conditions change, and as we mature and grow, our values and priorities change. But when we use values to make decisions, we focus on what's important to us, and we need to have that real sense of belonging. So when you're working with families and parents, guardians, caregivers, and you're setting goals that are in line with their value systems, they are much more likely to follow through with the steps necessary to achieve those goals. That's why it's important to look at our own belief system and our own value system as family support staff, as it can influence how the goal setting process happens. For example, if myself as a family support person have I place a very high value on professionalism, working outside of the home, creating a career for myself, and I'm working with a mom who does not want to work outside of the home and wants to stay home with her children until they go to kindergarten, you might unconsciously or consciously, that might affect how your ability to meet that family and be that coaching person for this family. And I think I will just pause really quickly and see if anybody has if anybody wrote a question or anything before I get into sort of the guiding principles. All right, so there are 4 basic guiding principles in motivational interviewing. The first one is express empathy. So empathy involves seeing the world through the family's eyes, thinking about things the family thinks about them, feelings that they feel about themselves, and having that sharing that experience with the family. So when you can get to a place where you're really expressing that empathy with families, this is when it makes for a really good model for the motivational interviewing. The other thing we want to do is support that self-efficacy. Oh my goodness, I knew I was not going to be able to say that word today. Nicole, Laura, help me say efficacy. Say it. Efficacy, right?
Efficacy, there you go.
It's Monday afternoon. I can't even believe that I'm still talking. Okay, so as a family support specialist, you help parents make their own decisions about change, right? And you acknowledge past success and reinforce intentions to change. Belief in the possibility of change is very important. Is a very important motivator. And the parents and the caregivers are responsible for choosing and carrying out that personal change. So it's just good to support them in that process. The other thing is to roll with resistance. So when I say resistance, this is resistance is a signal to you to change your direction or to listen more carefully. We always talk about staying curious and asking more questions. So resistance actually offers you an opportunity to respond in a new way, take advantage of the situation without being confrontational, but just adjusting your stance, sort of. So, we're trying to avoid sort of invoking resistance when possible. But when you start to feel that resistance with clients or with families, I think it's a signal to us that, oh, I need to roll with this. Let me go at this with a different lens. And then develop discrepancy. So motivation for change is enhanced when clients perceive discrepancies between their current situation and their hopes for the future. And your task is to help focus on your family's attentions or parents' attentions on how current behaviors differ from the ideal or desired behavior. That discrepancy, initially highlighted, can raise your family's awareness, and hopefully they can kind of see, oh, I get it. Okay, I'm here. There is a big discrepancy between where I want to be. And using that, we can focus on what are the steps that we need to take to get there. Now, it is at times really difficult because that client gets to see that discrepancy, right? They see what a big maybe, I don't know, mountain to climb is a thing, but going over the bridge can be a big thing to get up way to the top. So again, this is where our empathy can come in. Okay. So I'm going to pause for just a minute because I don't want to keep going if somebody had a question.
Carrie, I don't see any questions coming in yet, but I will make sure to let you know if there are.
Okay. So one of the biggest or largest techniques that folks use when we're talking about motivational interviewing is the acronym OARS. And OARS are the skills that can be used by family support staff to help parents move through this process of change. So these skills are used to encourage families to talk and explore about that ambivalence that they have. And when they are successfully used, these skills can result in this idea of change talk, or you see your families or your parents or your caregivers you're working in start talking about their goals a little bit differently. And that's really at the heart of motivational interviewing. So we're going to step by step look at what this sort of looks like. This could be a review for many of you. So the first, I'll just kind of go over what OARS stands for. The O is open-ended questions. The A is affirmations. The R is reflective listening, and then the S stands for summarizing. So, all right, we're going to do a little example of what open-ended questions are and what they look like. So here is the family support staff and a possible caregiver, and the family support says, well, the last time we talked, we were talking about saving money. And she says, well, I really haven't thought about it. Uh-oh, here's where this little bubble comes in, and she's like, oh, I knew she wasn't going to do that. Okay, oh, no, we have to like temper ourselves and say, oh, I'm not going to let my beliefs or values come in here. I'm going to continue on open-ended questions. So this is a great example of an open-ended question. Can you tell me more about that? And then she says, well, how can I save money or fix my credit when I don't even have bills to pay? I mean, monthly income to pay my bills. So then we move on to affirmation. Here you are having the same kind of conversation, and the parent says, well, I mean, what's the point? My score is so low. I'm never going to be able to recover my credit. Uh-oh, here comes that gray cloud of thought. It says, come on, there's lots of ways to repair your credit. Nope, we're not going to say that. We're going to use our affirmations. And maybe you say, it appears that you're worried you won't recover. And really an affirmation is just sort of confirming or giving that person, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. And this mom says, well, I did look at my credit score online and it was really bad. This is when you're going to take every opportunity to any step in the right direction in that goal area. We really want to, congratulate them, affirm that they're doing the right thing. So it says, great job. The first step of knowing is knowing where you stand. So reflections are, maybe the parent says, last month I was late on 2 credit cards and that even lowered my score even further. And a reflection would be you're just saying back what they said. So what I hear you say is that you're worried that your score is getting worse. Yeah, it's gone from bad to worse, so why should I try? So again, here's a reflection. So what you're saying to me is that you're feeling there's little hope for your credit to repair and for you to save money. And then the S out of OARS is really summarizing or putting all of the thoughts together that the family or parent has been telling you so that they understand that you have a pretty clear picture of what they're saying. So in this example, it says, so what I'm hearing you say so far is that you did look up your credit score, you're concerned it's getting worse, and you're feeling like you can't get yourself out of this situation. So now we've used the ORs, and now we've done our reflecting, and we've done all these things. So now what? So how do you get them to sort of go in the next direction? And really what we want to do, and I think it was Beth Meisel this morning who said, ask powerful questions. That was such a great term that I heard for the first time. Yeah, we want to dig deeper. We want to start asking some questions and being curious about it. So maybe we say things like, so what's the evidence of that? Or how are you basing your decision? So if somebody's in that place where like, yeah, there's no hope, or why should I even try? Maybe using some statements like, so what are you basing that on? Can get them talking about where that ambivalence is. Another way is to sort of take the opposite view. So if I'm having this conversation with the family, maybe I would ask them, so what would it look like if you really could save money and you did repair your score? Again, I think this is coming from that place of that discrepancy might seem so big, like how could I ever recover this? But getting them to sort of future think, like what if you could do it? How would it be different in your life? You know, if you can break that chain of assumptions for them, for an individual, the entire link falls apart once that chain, that chain of assumptions is broken. Then hopefully we can do something about the ambivalence. So, all right. I don't think we have any questions yet, Nicole. Am I correct? So let's talk about...
No questions yet. Sorry. That took me a minute. I had to unmute myself.
So let's talk a little bit about, so how do you use these ORs? And I can't take credit for being as clever as Karen Gans is thinking about these as ORs, as an actual oars in the water. But as you know, you can see that as a family support person, I sort of think of us as the guide on the back of the boat, right? Everybody in the boat is sort of working towards getting us somewhere, but this guide is there to make sure everybody's staying in the boat safely, that they have all their proper gear, and you're headed on this journey in this boat, working to keep it afloat, right? But then at times, the boat tips over, and when the boat spills over, hopefully this is the time where we can keep that situation in perspective, and everyone still is feeling really good about what's happening, because we know, working with families, at times the boat does tip over, and there will be times when it's going to have to be the guide that's saying, okay, we're all going to get back in the boat, and this is how we're going to get back down the river. And hopefully, we want to make sure that you are guiding your parents and families and caregivers down the river, but that you're not the only one in the boat. So you can see in this photo, you don't want to be the only person driving this boat. It's definitely a team thing, and really what we want is everyone working as hard as anyone else is, and you're sort of just doing the guiding. So I think that is sort of my little introduction into motivational interviewing. There is going to be a handout that you guys will be getting on base camp around OARs, and it's got some great examples of questions and ways that you can use OARs in your family support work that you do.
Thanks, Carrie. So real quick about handouts, that was a great segue. Thank you so much for that. So before we open the call to our panelist, the person that's joined us today, I did want to direct your attention to the handouts that are actually available on this webinar. So one of those is the same one that Carrie was talking about, and I can also post it on the Basecamp later. But you'll see that it's called Bridge Pillar Resources and Wellbeing, and it says Using OARs. So you can click on that to download it. There are also 2 other handouts, and these were also given to us by Empath, and Andrea requested that these be available to you while we're going through the next section as well. So you'll see a couple of roadmaps, and you can download those as well for your use. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over in a minute to our guest on the line today, staff from Economic Mobility Pathways. So Andrea will present a little more on linking motivational interviewing with mobility mentoring, with that work that you're doing with families this year. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. Andrea, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay. Really quickly, hang on, I've got to switch you over. I forgot that I need to give you the mouse and the keyboard. Okay, you should have control now. See if you do. And you can just click on the screen to move it to the next one.
No, it doesn't seem to be moving slides. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Great.
Okay. So thank you for the summary on what motivational interviewing is. So I just wanted to bring up here, to get us started, the definition of mobility mentoring. So it is the professional practice of partnering with clients so that over time they may acquire the resources, skills, and sustained behavior changes necessary to attain and preserve their economic independence. And so here we have an image of the relationship between 4 different perspectives that we are influenced by when practicing mobility mentoring. And we're going to focus on motivational interviewing and the aspects of MI that we borrow when we're using mobility mentoring. But I also wanted to briefly discuss chronic stress, self-regulation, and executive functioning, because I found that keeping this part of the picture in mind when we're thinking about what parts of motivational interviewing that are useful with our participants really adds to the discussion. Bringing the impact of stress on the brain into this conversation really helps you fully see how MI is used as an intervention, as a way of guiding our interactions, and as a fundamental perspective. So it's really helpful to think about how it's useful in our work. For many reasons, motivational interviewing is a useful tool for mitigating difficulties that we encounter in our work with our clients living in poverty. Our clients are living in chronic stress, and when using MI, we are practicing a mindful way of engaging with our participants. MI is a structured way of having a conversation that is geared towards helping our clients find their intrinsic motivation rather than just addressing the immediate crisis. We work to support them in finding their plan for getting what they need and how we can best support them along that journey. Sorry, just trying to click. There we go. Okay. For many people, there are daily crises that overlap and take up so much space in their life that they can't tap into their internal motivation without proper guidance, belief from us that it matters, and belief that it will get them to where they want faster and more efficiently than if someone simply told them exactly what to do. So in order for us to learn to help our participants find their internal motivation, we must first recognize that stress, self-regulation, and executive functioning are really key players in this mentoring relationship because, again, living in poverty is living in chronic stress. And so this means that the brain and the body are preoccupied with pending threat. And with that, humans are unable to access their brain's prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functioning skills are. And that fact is true for all human beings, our clients and our staff. So it's important that we take a non-judgmental stance and acknowledge that this is the rule and not the exception. We want to promote safe, structured, and predictable environments if we want to access true internal motivation, a true sense of safety, and long-standing growth for our participants. Because we live in a very distracting culture where we often feel overwhelmed and overloaded with many things competing for our attention. So being able to regulate our attention improves our concentration, our memory, and our overall mental clarity. Increasing mindfulness practices decreases this hijacking that happens unintentionally to our brains. It increases the brain's ability to regulate itself, to engage in the stress response when we are under attack, and move out of the stress response when we're actually in a safe space. So when you have a structured conversation with your client using motivational interviewing tools and some mobility mentoring suggested strategies, you're actually practicing a mindful and self-regulating activity right then and there with them. Oops, sorry, can I go back? There we go, okay. So just briefly here is an overview of what executive functioning is. It is developed throughout our lifetime and refers to the ability to manage one's own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. These skills are developed through consistent and dependable environments starting at an early age. The mobility mentoring framework respects this understanding of stress's impact on self-regulation, and our ability to get things done. And it seeks to provide a safe and secure environment and relationships, as well as strategies to help participants practice executive functioning skills, which are impacted by stress. And so through the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard, we learned that stress affects your ability to access many cognitive and emotional skills that are actually necessary for upward mobility. And therefore, we strive to use our coaching relationship strategically to support and build these skills. So some of the things that are impacted are our working memory, which governs our ability to hold and manipulate pieces of information over short periods of time. Our mental flexibility, which helps us to sustain or shift attention in response to different demands or to apply different rules in different situations. And our impulse control is also affected. This is what enables us to set priorities and resist impulsive actions or responses. And I'm sure even just briefly thinking about some of the families we work with, or maybe certain people in particular, or even coworkers possibly, we can see how stress impacts these different aspects of our prefrontal cortex. So we know that living in a chronically stressed state affects these things, affects these aspects of our brain functioning, no matter who you are. And it's smart to be in the habit of disengaging that, in the habit of practicing self-regulation, and to be in the habit of mirroring that for our clients. So when you're using a mobility mentoring model, you're meeting your participant where they are at. And I know that we hear that a lot, but we really mean that. And so for some people that will mean letting them come into your office and vent for the first 10 minutes of the meeting, because together you've zoomed out and you've discussed that this actually helps them clear their mind so that they can focus on the agenda for today's meeting. Or for another participant, it might mean starting the meeting by reading together the notes from your previous meeting and then together creating an agenda. And for some people, maybe they need reminders, or they need, you can use a timer in your meeting. Maybe they need some light music playing in the background while you meet to help with distractions, or it could be something else completely that you discover together. But it's important to talk about, how is this process working, and to be able to talk about self-regulation with our clients. Okay, so in order to use motivational interviewing while practicing a mobility mentoring kind of coaching, you really don't need to go through a lengthy MI training. There are aspects of MI that marry well with practicing mobility mentoring, such as I talked about, it's a mindful and structured conversation. But also remembering the 4 fundamental processes of MI, which are engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. Some of the underlying assumptions of MI overlap with mobility mentoring, such as our focus on acceptance of our participants and that all people have the potential for growth, belief in their autonomy, belief that everyone really should be making their own decisions, it's up to them, the belief that less is better, and it's really more about the participant than the mentor, so we should be listening more than we're talking. We want to elicit rather than impart knowledge on people, kind of that Michelangelo belief that he didn't create David. David was in the marble already, and all he did was chop away at the marble until David appeared. Also a belief that ambivalence is a normal part of the change process, and so we should be prepared for this. We should be accepting of the fact that people are going to want 2 things at the same time, and they're not going to be sure about moving forward. They're not going to be sure. Use of unconditional positive regard in our relationship with our clients and with our team members, with our coworkers. We also want to acknowledge the righting reflex, which is our desire to help people feel better. Sometimes it can be really tough to sit across the table from somebody who's really in a lot of pain. And in addition, we of course want to use ORs, as we talked about earlier. Scaling questions we like to use in mobility mentoring, which you'll see in the roadmap that we're going to talk about. We want to be evoking and promoting change talk and use of goal setting to create a plan of action. And so I guess my point here is that using MI skills, especially the ORs, or skills, really allows for your work as a mobility mentor to be completely focused on what is working and what is not working for your participants, to be focused on their ideas about what to focus on, and to actively listen and continually reflect back to them what they've shared with you. So when you're doing a bridge assessment, this is a really great time to use ORs to gather information and then make a plan for goal setting. And at the end of a bridge assessment, you might have a pretty good idea as to what the next goal should be for that person, what the action steps could be, and what the timeline should be. But, as a mobility mentor, we really feel that it's important for you to hold back your assumptions about how this should go and make sure that you ask the participant first what they think. So I often end a bridge assessment with saying, looking at your bridge here, what do you think is your next step? Are there any smaller action steps or just little things that you might need to take care of before you can work on that step? What resources will you need? Who can you lean on if you need some help with this? When can you set aside some time to work on this? And what's a reasonable date for you to achieve this goal? So we really want to strive to use ORs as often as possible because it opens up the conversation to many possibilities and gets the client talking about the things that matter to them rather than us focusing on what we think should be happening next. And we really want to use these reflections and summaries to steer the conversation. Okay, so if we don't have any questions, we can move on to one of the handouts, which is this roadmap. I think the first one that we can talk about is the scenario up at the top where it says a participant who previously achieved goals is now having difficulty with goal progression. So here you'll see the focus that we suggest right at the top there, which is when someone is having difficulty with continuing to progress on their goals, we would suggest that you reflect on some past successes of this participant and continue to evaluate your relationship to determine what you as the mentor may need to change for a participant to succeed again. So really the fundamental piece here is that we can't force somebody to do something, and we can't force change upon anybody, but we can control how we are in the relationship, right? So that seems like a good opportunity to see what we can do in our part of this to try and get them back on track. So below the focus here, you'll see 3 suggestions. So the first one would be take a step back. So here, as was mentioned before when we were talking about MI, you really want to express curiosity and reflect back an understanding of, maybe things have changed for you. What's going on now where this goal may not be so important as it was before? And that can really open up the conversation and give you a lot of good information. Additionally, reviewing your goals, bringing them back into the purpose of goal setting and exploring new pathways to work towards longer-term goals. So that could be a good option for you. Additionally, we would suggest reflecting and affirming. So you want to use accurate reflections and affirmations to recognize strengths, and the strength demonstrated by not giving up, as well as strength that they've previously shown in their goal setting abilities. And so then moving down here, we see the question, progress on goal. So did they make progress on their goal? Yes. So you'll see on the left here, yeah, they did. Using these suggestions above, taking a step back, reviewing goals, reflecting and affirming, really kind of open the conversation to give you and your participants some more ammo to set maybe a more appropriate goal or put some supports in place that got them farther on their goal. So the next time you met with them, yeah, they had met their goal. And so some suggestions here are to, reflect and affirm, use some more motivational interviewing for continuing this progress, and to set a date. So you want to continue that momentum and planning your next meeting together. On the right here, we see the not yet option. So maybe they didn't make any progress on that goal. We would suggest really focusing on trying to elicit some change talk. And you can utilize scaling in confidence and importance to a participant. So, sometimes a way of having, getting a little more honesty out of people can be to use scaling questions. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in achieving this goal? Sometimes people can be feeling, yeah, I could do that. A 9, I could achieve that goal. Okay, and then on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you? Well, maybe the importance is a 2. So that's really not a great goal for you to be working on anymore. And then some action steps. So maybe you spend part of the meeting completing some of these action steps together. And I will say that this is, for me, probably one of the most helpful things that I do in my meetings with participants often. So unless there's a question here about a roadmap, I can share an example. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. So I was working with a participant who, when we first started, was very motivated. She achieved every goal that we set, and at the time we were working on updating her resume and doing some job searching and just some skills and knowledge around that, and also connecting with her son's teachers to best support him at school. And she was really moving along with these goals for a few months. And then I lost contact with her. And at the time, she was in one of our long-term programs, and I was an additional support within Empath. So we have a 5-year program of which she was in her first year. And they hadn't heard from her. I hadn't heard from her. She contacted them and dropped out. And we emailed back and forth, and all she told me was that she couldn't commit and didn't want to think long-term anymore. She just wanted to live in the moment, and she just really couldn't handle the commitment of the longer-term program. But she did say that she wanted to keep meeting with me, but she canceled or no-showed to, I mean, it was more than 10 meetings over the course of a couple of months. And I just kept telling her that I was here for her when she was ready, and I worked really hard to not let her see or feel any of my annoyance with her missing so many appointments. It's inconvenient, but it was really important as a mentor that she not feel that from me. So after, I think it was about 4 months of this kind of back and forth scheduling and no-showing, she came in and we did meet in person. And so this was my opportunity here, on the roadmap says, to really take a step back and express curiosity and reflect back to her, what could be going on that things really changed so much. And so she explained to me what sounded like seasonal depression or possibly bipolar disorder. And so after some talking, and once we were on the same page, we were able to put our work together in perspective and really discuss how, as a mentor, I could help, right? Because I'm not her therapist, and my role with her is pretty specific. So what can I do? How can I be in this relationship so that she's really still progressing in life? So we reviewed our goals, and in doing so, realized that she really definitely needed professional mental health support in order to achieve the longer-term goals and find stability in her life. So use of reflections and affirmations of her strengths was particularly important in this meeting because of the delicate nature of what she had shared with me and the fact that she really was feeling very down and depressed and like she had let people down. So, and I've found just personally, I don't know if other folks feel this way, but affirmations can feel a little funny to say out loud when you first start practicing them. But truly what we know from motivational interviewing research is that they make a huge difference in a participant's ability to access intrinsic motivation and hold a positive sense of themselves. So it really does go a long way. From here, with that participant, we created some action steps together that involved calling her health insurance, getting a list of providers, setting up appointments, and attending those appointments, and then setting up regular therapy and psychiatry with a provider that she was interested in working with. So in my example, we completed some of these action steps together. So like I was saying, I really like to do this, even just to get the ball rolling with people. And if possible, I suggest that you do this too. So what we did, we called the insurance together and we did a list together. And I had asked her, do you want to do the talking on the phone, or do you want to say, that you give permission for me to talk? And we kind of talked about that, and we talked about her fears about just calling, and this was really a coaching moment. And so she started attending weekly psychotherapy and monthly psychiatry appointments. I'm still working with her. She tells me she feels better. She's starting to be able to think long-term again, and will be rejoining our 5-year program when we can. And so that's kind of it, with ending with the example for me. Open to any questions or feedback on the roadmap that anybody has.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions for Andrea, go ahead and type them into the question box. We'll just take a quick pause to see if there's any questions, and then we'll continue. Okay, I am not seeing any questions come in yet, so I'll just keep an eye on the question box, and if we get questions throughout the rest of the presentation, then we can talk about them.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to We're going to move on to goal setting. So last time, if you joined us on the last Direct Services staff webinar about the Family Support Pilot, we highlighted one of the pillars of the bridge and talked a little bit more about that. But today we thought that goal setting and motivation kind of go hand in hand. So we're going to talk a little bit about the goal setting process and motivation, and we're going to end with some thoughts about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So as I'm going along, Andrea or Carrie, if you have anything to say, go ahead and pop in and interrupt me, or whatever you'd like to do there. So what does motivation have to do with setting goals, and how can we help parents set and achieve goals based on their bridges? So let's talk a little bit about goal setting first. So you can see that we have the goal setting process here. So I'm just going to go through kind of each one of these steps in goal setting that MPATH has designed for work with mobility mentoring, and so we'll go through each step here. So it starts with assessment. The strong goals always begin with an assessment, and that is the bridge. And then the next step really is to tune in, and that occurs, kind of while the bridge is being completed and immediately after. And what you do is, you reflect on what the coach and the family or participant see on the bridge. So that's where you can start using some ORs there and asking, what stands out about the bridge? Do you see any? Is there anything that surprised you? What strengths do you see here? And then the next step in the process, heading to the right, I believe, is identifying potential goals. And so you're utilizing that assessment and tuning in to identify the areas in which work is needed. And this is where you're really encouraging the participant or the family to brainstorm a wide range of goals. And you can say, we've talked about where you are now. Where would you like to be? And so so that's kind of a good way to continue that conversation. And number 4 is to prioritize and refine the goals. So coaching to help the parent narrow down goals to the top priority. So we've brainstormed all these goals. What seems most important when we talked about all the goals that we just talked about? So really helping them focus on what's most important. And then the next step in that is to identify supports and challenges and resources and link them to specific steps of those goals. So what strengths and resources, like Andrea said before, will help you achieve your goal? What will be a challenge? What's your motivation to complete this goal, or even just this specific step? And then develop those action steps that act as a map to achieving the goal. So that's the next piece. So what steps do they need to take to achieve this? Help the participants see if they are a SMART goal. So really breaking down that overarching goal into smaller steps helps, as both Carrie and Andrea have talked about already today, celebrate those steps that are completed and help refocus and keep the motivation going. So then the next one here that you see is work on goals. So checking in regularly, working on completing the action steps. So you can ask, what steps have been accomplished? Did you have any challenges while you were accomplishing those steps? And then the last piece is really just to reflect. So after a good portion of the steps, or maybe a goal is completed, you can reflect on those and, so importantly, celebrate those pieces that have been completed. So, this could look like asking a family, a parent, what accomplishments make you the most proud as we're looking back on this? What did you learn about goal setting? What did you learn about your strengths, or how you navigate through challenges? Those are all great questions that, as we continue throughout our program year with families, that we can, as we go along and they start achieving some steps, or maybe even a goal or two, that we can ask and reflect on with them. Okay, so in our work with families, we use a version of this goal planning sheet that we have up here on the screen. A lot of you are entering your information directly into the early learning management system, and it looks fairly similar to this, but not exact. This is the recording tool for kind of this conversation that we're having about goal setting. So this is where you, you know, in the family members' words, help them write down what their major SMART goal is, whether it's, you know, saving 1 month's worth of savings, or whether it's, you know, starting classes at the community college, whatever you identify, you write that down. And then when you're entering the information online, we also ask you to, you know, identify which of the bridge pillars you're focusing on, and that really helps us see what people are focusing on consistently, or what programs are consistently focusing on with families. And then under that, you have a chance to put in the next steps to the goals. So you can help them break those down into individual steps. There's a column for by when. There's a column to write down what strengths and resources they bring to that, or what resources you can help them get or access for completing that step. The next column is for writing down any potential barriers or concerns they see with completing that step. So, you know, let's say that they want to sign up for classes, but they don't have internet access. So how are they going to sign up for classes if it's potentially, you know, all of the signing up for classes is online, right? But maybe in the strengths area or resources area, they might, you know, they might have someone that they can borrow a computer for, or something like that, or go over to their house and use their internet for a little while to help them sign up for classes. And then we have a column about motivation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. We're going to focus on that in just a moment. So this is really writing down what's the motivation, or how can we celebrate this when we complete that step. And then there's also a spot to put what date, when the date was when the step was completed. Okay. So I do have one quick little question coming in, and it is that, can we get a copy of that last chart? I'm assuming you mean the goal setting process chart, and that's definitely. I can post that onto Basecamp, and hopefully you can access it there. If you're not on Basecamp, then I can also send you that in email, or send it to your agency coordinator to forward on to you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this motivation column and what we're really getting at when we ask questions about motivation and goal steps. So one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit real quick is with mobility mentoring, there's a key piece of mobility mentoring that is incentives, and a lot of our programs, because of the state funds that we're using, we may not be able to provide actual monetary incentives, but really the piece behind this is motivation, and you know, working on extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, which we'll talk a little bit about after this. So we really want to kind of focus on how can we get at that with the limitations that we have here. So the first one is when we're talking about motivation. When you talk with participants about their motivation for this goal or step, it helps to give a clear sense of self-efficacy and achievement. So that's really going to help them be able to focus on what that motivation or what that celebration is going to be when they complete that step. Also, the emotional connection to this step is so important. If participants, or parents or family members are invested, like we've said before on this webinar, I think repeated a couple of times already, if they're invested instead of told to, it's more likely to be motivating for that person. Okay, we also talked a little bit about building executive functioning skills with Andrea. So, you know, talking about motivation and having this conversation about motivation could help build any executive functioning skills depending on the situation. For example, if a parent is making a budget or savings goal and their motivation is to feel safer about any unexpected expenses, you know, those expenses that can pop up for any of us when our car breaks down, or when we have a bill we forgot to pay or something like that. But if their motivation is to feel safer about any unexpected expenses. It's helping to build potentially mental flexibility and impulse control at the same time. And it's also engaging that future-oriented thinking as well. Okay, number 4, it also builds accountability. So if they tell, if a parent tells you their motivation, you can help hold that parent accountable when completing a step seems difficult. So you can reflect back on this and say, really, you know, your motivation for doing this, let's say they're going back to school again, and those are kind of the 2 examples that I'm using. They want to sign up for classes or budgeting, but let's say we're focusing on signing up for classes, and their motivation to do this was they identified that they want to be able to provide a more stable economic future for their children, and so they want, you know, they want to be able to have more income to provide different things for them. And so kind of reflecting back on that with them about the motivation that they identified can help when the going gets tough, really. So the next one is, you know, it can, like we already talked about, it can also help you confirm the accomplishment when it's done. So you know, you talked about the motivation, you did it, and way to keep that motivation as things got tough there. And it also creates momentum. So, you know, in developing that sense of momentum, if a parent or a participant completes a step of a single, like maybe even just a single step of a goal, like we've been talking about, it develops that sense of momentum, like I can keep going and I can do even more. So really focusing on celebrating when they complete that piece is really important as well. And then the last piece is really, it focuses on that needed motivation and encouragement to complete the whole goal, and it helps you focus on intrinsic motivation with families. So I'm going to pop over to the next slide. Yeah, so motivation really centers around why am I doing this, and how can I focus on this? Okay, so extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic really is it's motivation based on tangible rewards, and it's external to the individual. So it comes from an outside source. Maybe minimal effort is required for it, and the reward is you know, maybe not always valued. And then intrinsic motivation is, you know, the incentives for the achievement of this are based on one's own goals and not someone else's. It's really, you know, things such as professional growth or a sense of pleasure or accomplishment in that intrinsic motivation. So that's kind of a general overview of that. Carrie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't think so. I think that's everything. Andrea,
Okay.
Did you want to add anything?
No, sounds good.
Okay, so I'm just going to move on to a little visual here about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So they can really differ in how effective they are in driving behavior. And so extrinsic motivation definitely can be helpful. It can induce interest or participation where there wasn't any before. It can motivate for learning new skills, and it can be a source of feedback. So if you're looking on the right hand of your screen, you know, those external forces, you know, we might have money or grades or praise, maybe part of someone's motivation for doing something, or career, you know, all of those things. And then also we need to kind of keep in mind that intrinsic motivation may decrease when external rewards are given for completing a particular task or only doing minimal work. So, you know, for example, if me as a parent, if I heap lavish praise on my child every time she completes a simple task, she may become less intrinsically motivated to perform that task in the future. So intrinsic motivation, again, is based on one's own goals or interests and curiosities, and it can create positive emotions. It can give people a sense of meaning and a sense of progress. I have a quote here. It says, intrinsic motivation occurs when we act without any obvious external rewards. We can simply enjoy an activity or see it as an opportunity to explore or learn or actualize our potentials. So again, on the left side of your screen, you can see that intrinsic motivation may be built off of a sense of achievement, of a personal achievement. It may be built on our own curiosity or interests, or our own pride that we take in doing a good job, doing a work well done, or something like that. So, okay, so I think that may be the end here that we have for you. So I would love to see if there's any questions that people have.